All right, so if you go onto your iPads, I know this is heresy. Welcome, everybody. It's Litsoc. It's not Computer Club. It's Litsoc. But we are looking at Virago Press today and Persephone books, and they have fabulous websites, and that's what we're accessing today. We also have a selection of books, mostly Virago.
All Virago.
In fact, all Virago, because the Persephone ones are probably on my shelf at home. We'll talk about that in another time. Anyway, so Virago first. Virago.co.uk. All right, it should look like that. Okay. All right. Or share with somebody if you haven't got it. Okay. Now, this is, you will notice if you're looking at it, that there is a little logo icon. Anybody explain to me what this is?
At the top.
At the top, right at the top, in red and Juno.
An apple?
Yeah, an apple, but not a whole apple.
It's got a bite.
It's got a bite out of it. It's not the apple. It's Virago was created 50 years ago, long before Apple was ever thought of. So, anybody tell me, Hannah, would you like to tell me what this means?
Is it to do with knowledge?
It's to do with knowledge and a particular person. Eve, yes, Eve, from the book of Genesis. Eve, of course, was tempted by the devil, Satan, the snake, and ate the apple and knew the difference between good and evil. And Virago took this as their logo, and it was on their books. And also their first books were all in this green, which is coincidentally our green as well, weirdly. Okay. And they really stood out in bookstores. There was another couple of women's publishers at the same time, Women's Press, and another one. They've long gone, sadly. But the Virago books really stood out. Now they have different covers, as you can see. But certainly for the first few years, they were all green. And the idea was, if you scroll down, welcome to Virago, a feminist publisher of outstanding books for all readers. Since we began in 1973, our mission has been to champion women's voices and bring them to the widest possible readership around the world. And this they have absolutely fulfilled, no question. They did publish modern authors, but they also went back to people like Rosamund Lehman, for example, who published in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. They also published people like Rebecca West, who published early in the 20th century. People who'd been forgotten, women, needless to say. They also published books by leading feminist authors. And now it's not just fiction and general non-fiction. We've got history, children's stories. They published, for example, this book by Angela Carter called The Sadian Woman, which she wrote after she'd explored Gothic and women's issues in The Bloody Chamber, for example. This goes very well if you're studying English literature at A-level. Margaret Atwood, I came across her in Virago. One of the first ones I read of her was The Robber Bride, which we've got here. And if you scroll down, you will see there's recommended reads, new things coming, reading recommendations. They also publish in translation. So let's have a look at classics that broke the mould, if you look at that. So we've got queer reads, layers of motherhood, books for fans of short stories, hidden histories. In fact, hidden histories, I've got a hardback of that. So classics that broke the mould. And here we are. There we are. That's what I'm looking at. Okay. The Yellow Wallpaper. Who's heard of that? I'm sure some of you have. Yes. This is about a woman who's had a baby and is being suggested by her husband, who's a doctor, that she rest. And she's at the top of the house. The windows have bars on them, and she's going slightly mad because she's got postnatal depression. That becomes clear, and she's supposed to rest. And this actually happened to Charlotte Perkin Gilman, and the yellow wallpaper becomes absolutely obsessive for her, and gradually it becomes a sort of torment to her. The Women's Room. This was an extraordinary book when it came out. They filmed it as well for the BBC, and it spoke to many, many women. Mary Renault, the charioteer. Mary Renault was one of the first authors that I know of that actually was out while she was writing. And she wrote, if you're doing classics or classiv, Latin, Greek, she wrote extensively. She rewrote the sort of Theseus and Minotaur story, and wrote about the theatre in Greece and all sorts of other things as well, long before Natalie Haynes or Pat Barker were writing about them. The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister, if you might have seen this on the television. This has been filmed as well. If you scroll down, lots of different ways of little introductions. Frost in May, Antonia White. This was on my reading list when I was in the sixth form. It's about a young girl and her experience at school in a convent, and that is actually what happened to Antonia White. So lots of classics, but also modern. If you look at Virago Modern Classics for children, if you look at this, you'll see lots of things that you're familiar with. Some of them are out of copyright now, which is why they're here. There's a book I noticed they're publishing by P.L. Travers that I don't know at all. I Go by Sea, I Go by Land. I think that's an emigre story. E. Nesbit, if you've never read E. Nesbit, she is... Who's read any E. Nesbit? Yes? Railway Children? Yeah. Treasure Seekers, The Would-Be Goods, 5 Children in It, The Samiyad, yeah. Very funny, but very ordinary children as well. Noel Stretfield, who wrote Ballet Shoes, Anne of Green Gables. Josie, you really like Anne of Green Gables, don't you? Yes. Rumer Godden, who's somebody I really like, she wrote a vast oeuvre, a lot of them set in India or here, different. Well, had anybody read Carrie's War? Yes, Annabelle. What do you like about Carrie? Do you like Carrie's War? Remember it?
Which book it is? Is it
set in Wales during the war, Second World War? Carrie's been evacuated with her brother.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah.
And they go to a house and meet a family that and there's a skull.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If you like stories about wartime, then it's really evocative and it's very it's quite sad, but it has a lovely ending too. Secret Garden, of course, fabulous.
You all read that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course you have.
Absolutely. Now, Virago was started by a very, very extraordinary woman. It basically Carmen Cahill. She worked at a magazine called Spare Rib. Spare Rib, of course, refers to the Eve story because Eve was supposedly created from Adam's rib when Adam was in a sleep by God in the Genesis story. And they then decided that they would publish books. And originally it was called Spare Rib Books, and then they decided to call it Virago. Now, Virago is a name. What do you understand by the name Virago?
it comes from Greek mythology, doesn't it? And I think the historical character of Virago, didn't she? I want to look at that. I'm going to look this up. Sorry, I've forgotten. But look, yeah, it was founded 25 years ago. I think the thing to say about Virago and as an imprint today, there's a lot of like sort of presses that publish for women only, but a lot of them are quite fringe. They're like sort of quite fight the power, aren't they? They're very like smash the patriarchy. Whereas Virago is actually very mainstream. It's actually, you know, it sort of goes toe to toe with the more famous publishing houses you would have heard of. It is a very big imprint, and so you know. Now, take that way. Some might say, "Oh, what sellouts they are," but actually, it's a good thing because it means that it's bringing to a more mainstream audience all these sort of talented female authors that we might have forgotten. Yeah. Here we go. Virago is a woman who demonstrates abundant masculine virtues.
Ooh, that's
the result I've got here. But basically, yeah, Hellenistic philosophy asserted that elite and exceptionally heroic men had virtues. You know, so obviously the Greeks they were all about the fine male specimens, weren't they? You know, classic students. You know, Josie's nodding over there. Classic students were certainly they almost like sort of fetishized and these idealistic forms. And I suppose now that I've reminded myself of that, I suppose it's the idea of, you know, why can't women these traits that are normally reserved for men? Why can't it be just sort of we just assume that women have them as well without making a big fuss of it?
Absolutely.
That's probably the way.
Feisty, intellectual.
Yeah.
Perfectly possible to enjoy these books by women, even if they are by women. They speak to every sex. They're not just for women. If you look at their first book, Fen Women, now that's non-fiction about actually living in an English village in quite a difficult area. Remember I talked about the Fens in Whistle I'll Come to You. Marshy, wet, trying to deal with that, farming as well, always not easy, and that was their first book. And another book that really actually put them on the map was Testament of Youth, and that was by Vera Brittain, published in 1978, and then they filmed it. And Vera Brittain wrote this book after the First World War. She had got a place at Oxford to read English, and she gave it up to become a nurse, because so many of her brother's friends and they were her friends too, were going off to fight, and she felt that she was being left behind. She'd got her place at Oxford. She'd had to struggle to get that because her parents obviously wanted her to marry, as she was an upper class woman of that era. In the early 20th century, she got this place, and then she decided she'd become a nurse. That was hard work, very hard work. And by the end of the war, the First World War, her brother was dead, her fiancé was dead, and all but one of his friends were dead as well. So her whole sort of close coterie were gone. She had to make a new life. She went back to Oxford. She became a writer, and she became somebody who worked very strongly for peace between the wars. And eventually she remarried and had a daughter who became Shirley Williams, a famous MP, Baroness, and in fact Shirley Williams was in the Labour Party when they created equal schooling for everybody, the comprehensive. So Testament of Youth was a very important book for them to publish, and indeed they continued to publish all her books, as well as her great friend Winifred Holtby. So Virago were they were pathfinders. And Carmen Cahill had a long history with Rosie Boycott. Rosie Boycott's still with us. Carmen Cahill's no longer, I'm afraid. But they had a long history of working in publishing. They took all their experience, and it was a big step because feminism, certainly by the middle of the 1970s, was becoming not very respectable, if it had ever been respectable, and they felt that they had to sort of reinvent things, and so they did. They went about doing it, and we have still got their legacy today, which is excellent. And as a consequence, we still, people went on to write. Many more women journalists, documentary makers, filmmakers, because Virago, they read Virago, and they found,
Paved the way.
yeah, they found things that they enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, look at some more recent examples. Just let's get ahead in the timeline. You got Sarah Waters, yeah, Tipping the Velvet, and Katie Ward, 50 Shades of Feminism. Patricia Highsmith got in there as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So and let's see if we go right up to the present day. What have they got for the 2020s? Obviously, at the times I knew I was gay. Got that downstairs. There you go.
There we are.
I should have got that as well.
Right.
That's a graphic memoir of sort of a coming out story of a woman, essentially. And then the Nancy Spain books. Yeah, we got those two. Poison for Teacher.
Oh yes, that's right. We have. Yes.
Black Narcissus, which is made into a film, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, so some very good...
some really good authors here.
And The Amazing List of London, how could we forget that one?
Ah, yes, of course.
That was in 2021.
Rediscovered by Mr. Gatiss, yes, which we discussed. Yes.
A Girl Interrupted. Anyone heard of that film with Winona Ryder? That's another sort of recent one.
Yep.
Monica Ali, of course. So there's I mean, if you go to the 2020s, there's loads of entries, actually, so it just goes to show how much more prolific people are now, women writers are now, as a result of there's more and more stuff coming out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And of course, Virago Books, it led on to the Women's Prize, and then also to our other press that we're going to look at today, and that's Persephone Books. So if you type in Persephone Books...
So that definitely is a Greek figure, by the way, Persephone.
And... so yet another classics mention. Who can tell me about Persephone? Phoebe.
Persephone was the goddess of springtime and the queen of the underworld mythology. She was kidnapped by Hades, the god of the underworld. And
Yes, that's right, absolutely. And daughter of Demeter, and representative of women who perhaps have to have two lives. One life is with a husband, another life is perhaps more of the mind and, reading and doing other things. So they used to be in Bloomsbury. And of course Bloomsbury is well known for its authors like Virginia Woolf and its artists, Vanessa Bell, Lytton Strachey, Duncan Grant, and then 2 years ago they moved to Bath, and they're in a place. If you just scroll down, you'll see the little watercolour of their shop. I've been there; it's lovely, a beautiful building, and then they're in 8 Edgar Buildings. Now, Edgar Buildings, they're very proud of the fact that it's mentioned in a Jane Austen novel. It's not in Jane Austen's time, it was not necessarily a very respectable area, but nonetheless, because there are Persephone. They're sort of about halfway up the big hill in Bath. And as it says, Persephone Books reprints neglected fiction and non-fiction, mostly by women writers and mostly dating from the mid-20th century. Now, you might think, well, hang on a minute, Virago do this too. And this is true. They complement each other, however. They have got our authors that Virago, for some reason, did not feel were going to sell. So, for example, they've got 147 books. They produce basically 2 each quarter of the year. So usually 4 a year. And they're all sorts of different things. War stories, short stories, novels about people undergoing extraordinary things like going to India. They've got gardening books, cookbooks, They reproduce people who've been neglected, both American and English. They also, if you scroll down a bit, they do a Persephone post, and every day, every weekday, they publish a picture, whether it's a portrait of a photograph or it's a painted picture, and they have a little story about it, and they have a theme, and that complements the books as well. And each month they produce a newsletter and tell us what they've been doing, the exhibitions and podcasts that they've been listening to. So again, they do publish mostly books for adult women, but there are also some books that they've come across in their childhood, and they publish that. So, for example, they publish a book called "The Children Who Lived in a Barn," and this is about I think it's 4 children whose parents are away, and they're left in the house, and they're not supposed to be in the house, and eventually the landlord comes for the rent. They can't pay the rent, so they move into this barn, and they have to learn to cook and look after themselves, and they have this wonderful invention called the hay box. And the hay box is a way of cooking things like an oven, but without actually having naked flame. The hay is warm and it cooks things. Long time ago, online we found one and actually tried it, and it does work. But they explain in the book how to do it. So let's have a look at the list. So books. If you look at books by category, so they've classified them for you. So teenagers, books for; thrillers, Victoriana, women's place, working women, World War I, World War II, poetry, mothers, humour, history. So I'm going to go to humour because under this list are two. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, three of the most fabulous books I highly recommend. So under humour, you will find Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day. Now, Miss Pettigrew has also been filmed. And this is a story. You see there's a little cartoon, little illustrations in this one. And it's a sort of Cinderella story, really. Winifred Watson came from Newcastle. And she wrote a little bit before she got married. And one of these was this book. And basically, Miss Pettigrew is a down-on-her-luck governess. She's sent by an employment agency to the wrong address. And instead of encountering children, who she's not very good with anyway, they always overrule her and there's always some sort of problem, she ends up meeting Miss LaFosse. Miss LaFosse is a nightclub singer. She's glamorous. And she also, Miss LaFosse, has various lovers on the go. And Miss Pettigrew, just by saying things how they are and advising her, changes Miss LaFosse's life and changes her own life too. And it is the most wonderful, funny story. And they filmed it with Frances McDormand and Amy Adams, who you may know from other things as well. Amy Adams is absolutely hilarious with Miss LaFosse. There's this absolutely extraordinary, and this happens in the book as well, there's an extraordinary moment where somebody's coming, and they know somebody's coming to see her, and Miss LaFosse is in her night negligee, and she's also got a wrap round her that's fur. I think it's false fur. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So she's talking. So Miss Pettigrew's talking to her about what she needs to do. We need to clear up. You need to get dressed. Yes, but isn't fur wonderful? And she's sliding up and down this great big leather Chesterfield, holding this fur, going, "Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this wonderful?" And and you look at her thinking, "Yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful." You really get this feeling about this fur and how amazing it is that she's on the leather, but also with this fur and this silk as well. It's just extraordinary. And meanwhile, Miss Pettigrew, who's really quite staid and a bit like, in some ways, Mary Poppins, is looking at her thinking, how did I stray into this madhouse? Anyway, she has a wonderful time, and by the end of the book story, she's literally lived for a day. Her whole life is changed, and so is Miss LaFosse. And then there's two others I want to talk about. Miss Bunkle's book and Miss Bunkle Married. Now, Miss Bunkle, D.E. Stevenson was an incredibly popular bestseller author. Not intellectual, not highbrow, but really very, very well-written books. And I've got her on my Kindle, Mrs. Tim. Mrs. Tim is a military wife, and that's what D.E. Stevenson was. She was a military wife. So while she was writing, she had to look after her husband, who was in the army, and all the changes that would bring, and also her children. And here's Miss Bunkle's book. Miss Bunkle is a single woman. She's quite hard up. She has a maid, but she's quite hard up. And she has to make some money. But she's written this book. And this book is sort of fantasy, but it's all about her village. So basically, the book gets published. She uses a nom de plume, a pseudonym, not her own name. And the village read it and recognise themselves. Oh, my God, this is me. No, this can't happen. This can't happen. So they have a sort of revolution. People start to behave better. People get very horrified. They're trying to find out who wrote it. Miss Bunkle is very, very frightened that they're going to find out. Anyway, eventually it finishes well, but it is absolutely hilarious as well. But eventually she has to leave the village before somebody finds out. But the book has changed people's lives, If you click on Miss Bunkle's book, you'll see D.E. Stevenson sold 4 million copies of her books in Britain and 3 million in the States. That is absolutely astonishing. Of course, between 1923 and 1970, we had no internet. We did have the radio, obviously, and films and television. But even so, it's extraordinary. And yet she kept on with her life, looking after her husband, but again, very, very funny, and also about the power of literature to change people. So, as you can see, any category you're interested in, they publish it. And a lot of the books that they publish are also about women and their ordinary lives between the wars. Women who perhaps didn't necessarily get married because the First World War had basically decimated the male population. Women doing jobs for the first time in their lives because their parents have died and they've got nobody to support them. People like, for example, Jane Eyre, if she hadn't met Mr. Rochester, for example. There's a book they do share with Virago. Virago published it first, Diary of a Provincial Lady. Elizabeth Van Arnhem has also been published by Virago. So they do cross over. Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, a seminal book about women writers. The necessity of women having a place of their own so they can work in the mind rather than necessarily, working in the house. They also have books such as, for example, Dorothy Whipple. Dorothy Whipple basically is the bestseller of Persephone because so many women in the 21st century find her characters absolutely fabulous. They speak to her. She wrote one of her their famous bestsellers is Someone at a Distance. Someone at a Distance is about a family whose lives are completely upended by a young woman who comes from France, and the husband falls in love with her. And so everything changes. And it's about seminal moments, and also characters change, have to make new decisions, look after themselves as well. They also publish a very, very gothic story called The Victorian Chaise Longue by Margarita Laskny. And that is a horror story, because basically what happens is the main character goes to sleep on this Victorian chaise longue and wakes up in the past. And what that means is that she wakes up in Victorian London, and she has no idea how she got there or what she can do to get back. And that's where she stays. And that means that all the things about being a Victorian woman, the angel in the house, the oppression, the suppression, having to, wear corsets and all that sort of thing, she has to deal with. And Lasky's basically saying, you might think things are not good now, but think what they were like back. And it's a sort of ghost story in a way. And also her other one that she wrote that Persephone published is Little Boy Lost. Little Boy Lost is set in France after the Second World War, and a man is searching for his son who has been basically lost because his mother has died during the war, and it has the most beautiful arc, one of the most fabulous endings ever, while he's looking for this little boy. So you can see lots of different things. So those are really our two women's authors, women's publishers. And they're very different now in feel, even though they've got a lot of books in common. Lots of non-fiction as well as fiction. Non-fiction written at the time about people. Forgotten authors. Books that have been ignored, perhaps. One of the things that Persephone also does is they publish novels that are written in verse. Obviously that's a YA tray now, but in fact the first, Judith Verst wrote hers in 1968, I think. Yes. It's Hard to Be Hip Over 30 and Other Tragedies of Married Life, 1968. The honeymoon is over and he's left for work, whistling something obvious from La Boheme and carrying a brown calfskin attaché case I never dreamed he was capable of owning, having started the day with 10 push-ups and a cold shower followed by a hearty breakfast. Okay. The honeymoon is over and I'm dry mopping the floor. And it's the American experience of the woman left at home while the man goes off to work. So, worth exploring. And certainly still both going strong. Virago is 50 years old this year. It's now owned by Hachette, but nonetheless still got all the strengths of its list. Persephone, still going strong despite having a change of scene. They're celebrating their anniversary 25 years next year with a big festival. We used to have once a year a conference. I've been to Cambridge a couple of times to meet authors and talk books, and that was really good. They've each got their different strengths, but lots and lots to explore, both non-fiction and fiction. So I hope that's explored for you. Two important presses, and who really said women should not be underrated as authors, particularly when you look at Margaret Atwood. Booker Prize winner, should be Nobel Prize winner, really.
Maybe
right?
she will be.
Let's hope. Maybe she'll be before she dies. Touch wood. Seminal authors from the past, and also many to come as well. So I hope you enjoy exploring those in more
Have a look
detail.
at some of the books we got. We've got some
Yeah.
non-fiction collection like The Furies is quite a new one there. Lots of feminists. This one here. Oops.
Yep.
Give Us Freedom.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's a good one as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And Angela Carter's a personal favourite of mine. Maybe not for the younger
No,
ones here, but yeah,
yeah.
well, I could say the same for Margaret Atwood as well. Of course.
but certainly really, and they're very because they're women are important. So the issues that are affecting women, for example, Afghanistan, Iran, education, how are we looking after the mental health of the young, etc. They're all issues that they're exploring and getting authors to, and they commission as well as publishers.
By giving them a
as
voice,
well.
giving
By
them a voice
them
that
a
they might
voice.
not have otherwise had.
Yeah.
You all know about Malala's story, of course, as an example, and just think, she obviously Malala isn't published by Virago or Persephone, but the point is they give voices to give voice to the voiceless, almost.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So-
Maya Angelou, Angelou. If you've studied Maya Angelou's Still I Rise, for example, all her autobiographies are published in Virago, and so in a time long before diversity was essential, Virago were there, and important that they were. So it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So very important.
Yeah.
Publishing houses, definitely.
Okay. What are we doing next week?
Okay, so next week.
Hannah.
Yeah, we need. Oh no, Hannah and me.
Hannah and you.
Yeah, we've kind of. We're going to talk about Taylor Jenkins Reid, and we need to. Maybe we should have a little.
Everyone has to dress up.
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, everyone has to dress up now.
Right. How are we
how's
dressing
this?
up?
What are we doing exactly? How's it going to work?
How is this going to work?
So everyone wear flared jeans and sunglasses.
Claire Johnson. Okay.
I haven't got flare G.
I
I
haven't
can wear
either. That's
sunglasses.
usually my
No,
jeans.
so no one.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing Taylor Jenkins Reid. So if anyone's heard of like Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Malibu Rising, we're going to be talking about that.
Right.
There'll be like food.
Will there be food?
I'll
Okay,
bring
can we talk? We need to talk a bit more about this.
It's a work in progress, everybody.
Yeah.
It'll be Taylor Jenkins Reid, hosted by Mr. Humphreys and Ms. Eisen, and we'll all be sunglasses, so you wear them too.
Even if it's a day like this, wear your sunglasses, all right?
It is going to be warm next week, so
there you go.
which is nice.
Okay.
So whatever we're up to. So there we are, an introduction, and I hope that you enjoy your exploration. And women authors rock.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll carry on with that next week.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so good,
All right.
good follow up. Okay, everybody. Thanks ever
Thank
so
you,
much
everyone.
for coming. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.